At the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, our goal is to create a just and inclusive society where all people and communities have the opportunity to succeed. One of the primary barriers to this goal we recognize is the impact of implicit bias, which refers to unconscious attitudes and stereotypes that can influence our decision-making, even if we're not aware of it. In this video, we explore how implicit bias affects crucial decisions that determine what pathways are available to individuals. The purpose is to illustrate that unconscious barriers present on these pathways can ultimately alter one's entire life trajectory. We'll start by looking at education. Studies tell us that teachers form different expectations and perceptions of students' behavior based on race. For example, one study showed that teachers rated the same student behavior, imaginative play, as indicative of positive outcomes for white preschoolers and negative outcomes for black preschoolers. This is important because it demonstrates the implicit use of race as a lens to evaluate students' behavior. Similarly, another research study focusing on school discipline showed teachers were more likely to implicitly view negative behavior as a persistent pattern for black students, while teachers were more likely to believe negative behaviors were an isolated incident when the student was white. Added together, these instances of the operation of implicit bias can create a staggering amount of adversity for students of color. Yet, these instances of biased expectations are just the tip of the iceberg. We also know that a history of racial disparity in education is evident in research on academic preparedness, disability diagnosis, and discipline outcomes, all of which can derail students' trajectories toward high school graduation and eventually higher education. Like other multi-stage processes, gaining access to higher education has many decision points during which implicit bias may influence outcomes. For example, one study examined how likely professors were to reply to an email from a potential graduate school applicant to discuss the program. The emails sent to various institutions were identical except information identifying the race and gender of the applicant. The study showed that regardless of the type of program, white males were the most likely to get a response to the email. The race or the gender of the advisor had no impact on these outcomes. What this study illustrates are important points of implicit discrimination in the higher education process that can go unnoticed. These informal communications aren't tracked or evaluated by the university. Thus, because implicit bias is unconscious, professors likely don't know when they exhibit implicit favoritism. It's not that they're malintentioned, but the effects for the applicants are nevertheless meaningful and can affect their academic trajectory. Now, consider the culmination of these differences at different decision points within the pathway to opportunity. By now, many students of color who have experienced implicit or overt discrimination at these junctions may have opted out of pursuing higher education altogether. But for those that remain, familiar barriers exist. These include lower expectations, stereotype threat, and lack of social support, to name a few. For those individuals who overcome the implicit biases they face during their academic careers, there are still hurdles to overcome when entering the workforce. A primary example is the effect of implicit bias on hiring managers' perceptions of resume quality and candidates' competency. We know through several experiments that individuals are more likely to evaluate work materials as higher quality when coming from a white male. In fact, one study even demonstrated that evaluators detected fewer errors when proofreading a writing sample from a white author versus an identical writing sample perceived to be written by a black author. Not only does implicit bias create barriers for many individuals to enter the workforce, but it can also affect internal workplace dynamics. For example, implicit biases affect people's perceptions of leadership skills and reveal the tendency to implicitly associate men with careers and women with staying at home. This is one example from a growing body of research that demonstrates how individuals' perceptions regarding the workforce and economy are impacted by implicit bias. Consider the impact of all of these barriers at once. This compounding effect certainly creates a very different picture of the American dream than what most of us hold to be true. Instead, it paints a reality where significant barriers exist for some groups, while significant advantages exist for others. all of which may be the result of unconscious dynamics. By looking at the lifelong impact of implicit bias at these gateways, we can understand why the notion of picking oneself up by their bootstraps just doesn't hold after facing so many instances of unconscious discrimination. Instead, we need a comprehensive view of structural equity that is also informed by our understanding of implicit bias. Human decision-making and structures of discrimination are two sides of the same coin. Both must be considered simultaneously to break down these barriers to equity in order to ensure all those living in our country can have a fulfilling, opportunity-filled life.